Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Today, I'm going to give you some of the insights behind some of the main lines. We'll talk about increased hostilities in Iran. We'll talk about President Trump's live speech last night about election fraud, so called, what's happening in Canada in that regard, and what yet another women's NBA star is saying that has nothing to do with basketball. And look, we're going to look to a trend among Gen Zs that I think you're going to find interesting. Let's jump right into it. So it was in fact true that last night President Trump went live on national, and of course that would make it international television. He had a great anticipated message. Everybody was sort of waiting with bated breath to see what it was going to be about. And we're on talk about that. Before I do, just want to reflect on anytime you turn on the news these days of late over the last few weeks, it's always the headline stories are always that the earth is apparently on fire and burning up because you're getting the heat wave notices. We're getting climate change notices. We're getting the fact that we should all just shut off all forms of electricity and hydrocarbons and maybe even just stop breathing. Otherwise, the world is in fact going to disappear in a mighty ball of fire because of climate change. Of course, as you know from listening to my newscasts and broadcasts, I look to different evidence on this and we compare the notes. So I just want to give you a thought a little bit behind any kind of reporting on anything is always going to be somewhat reflected and affected by the bias of the person who's giving the news report. Now, I will admit that as a small c conservative, I see things through a worldview that is a small c conservative worldview and world lens. In spite of that, I still try and give the truth on an item and not back away from it if it just doesn't happen to match my narrative. So what we're seeing, we've got to realize again that most of the vast majority of mainstream media, whether we're talking about even now we're talking about the platforms like whether you're talking about TikTok or Facebook or Instagram, whatever it might be, reports on there, or in fact any of the main networks, they are populated by and operated by and commented in by people who are largely cultural Marxists in their worldview. And that simply means they've gone through, anybody's gone through the public system in the last, say, 60 or 70 years, even longer, and then gone out to university, have been affected by teaching that is culturally Marxist. We've talked about this in detail before. Mainly, you look at Karl Marx's main pretexts in terms of what he saw, how he saw the universe, and first saying that there can be no God, and secondly, that the family has to be redefined, and that if you don't need family, you certainly don't need family homes. You don't need private property to the same degree, and you don't need to be working hard then to get a down payment to get yourself a home. And if you don't need that, then certainly you shouldn't have the choice in terms of what job you should be going into and what type of workforce. A few elite, really, really smart people and a few elite, really, really smart organizations should actually control our lives and everything we're doing. And of course, anybody who opposes the view of the mainstream is actually trying to hurt the community and must be canceled. So that's, I mean, in a nutshell, that's cultural Marxism, and that is where most media live, and it's the lens through which they see the world. So when they are reporting on something like climate, they're also wanting to, though they don't say it, reflect their view that they think business is bad and industry is bad and production is bad and growth is bad, even having families and having kids, especially if you've got having several kids, that's bad because you're destroying the environment. So all of these narratives are perpetuated from a culturally Marxist point of view, which is very important in terms of recognizing that when we hear all these reports, yes, there are heat waves going on right now. Yes, there are interesting things going on relative to the weather. But when we talk about the climate, there is a large scientific community that has different views on this that are scientifically based. They don't get the same coverage because they tend not to be culturally Marxist. So it's just important when you hear these things that you look to alternative sources. And there actually are a number of very credible scientifically based sources that report the other side of the climate narrative. And these sources are even acknowledged by leftists and leftist reporters who grudgingly say, well, okay, they do appear to use scientific data. We don't agree with it, but they do appear to be scientifically based. So a couple of these, and I'm not saying they're always perfect, but if you want to look at a platform called Climate Audit. There's another one called Climate Etc. That's Climate ETC. Uh, Judith Clark is Judith Curry is one of the main proponents there, a scientist in herself. And then if you want to see some of the sources, some networks that sort of correlate and aggregate these different scientific sources, Peter Clack. Peter Clack is a good one, though he doesn't profess to be a scientist, but he just collates the data. So I would suggest that after you've listened to CNN or BBC or ABC or CBC in Canada, and you've heard all about the warnings about the climate and we're kind of doomed, you want to check out some of these sources just so you can get a balancing view and understanding that you're going to face and see some bias wherever you are. Well, last night, much anticipated, President Trump had requested the networks to carry him live with an important message, and so many people were wondering what it was going to be. It was basically about his concerns about election fraud. Now, interesting, he requested to go live with this as a presidential request. Some networks, CNN didn't cover it at all, though they did a lot of commentary on it. I won't say they didn't cover it, they didn't broadcast it. ABC and NBC, they put it on their streaming channels. They didn't put it on their main networks. Fox News put it on their main network. CBS News put it on their main network. So even there, you can see people leaning entire networks choosing whether to do it or not. But the biggest question was the whole issue about voter fraud and were elections stolen, etc. Here's the overriding concern where there is some truth in terms of concern. Where fraud comes in, the first area is if you are in a country, a nation, or a province or a state that does not require identification. I mean, some are even saying, well, if you got a library card, you can vote. It is very important from the point of view of citizenship. There's not too many things that go with citizenship in terms of that gives you certain rights and certain privileges anymore in most nations, but voting is one of them. You, as a citizen, you should have the right to vote. Absolutely. As a non-citizen, you should not have that right. You're not invested in the country the same way. And so citizenship is continually under attack from that regard. But this is the biggest area of concern, actually, is when you don't have proper ID, then it's not so much a ballot box stuffing, though that happens occasionally. It's what they call ballot harvesting, where you can go out and get a bunch of ballots and then potentially put your own mark on those ballots. So this more and more with mail-in ballots, huge percentage are mail-in ballots now. And it used to start, it used to be back when I was knocking on doors and doing things like that, and I still do knock on doors and train candidates, but you could go into, for instance, in a senior's home where people were not able to get out to vote, to go to the polls, they could have a polling booth set up there and it was monitored as it was all other polling booths. But that expanded into just if you had the signature of a particular party that you were supporting, you could actually go around to seniors' homes. You could even go door to door. And as is happening now, you can go to homeless shelters where people are, in many cases, they don't even know what they're doing, and get people's names. And you can ballot harvest and do that for your party. There is no question that ballot harvesting goes on and measures should be taken to limit that. I've advocated way back since electronic voting started that we should maintain paper ballot voting. It seems archaic, but with everything that can be done online, with all the ways in which platforms can be hacked and things can be changed in ways you can't even see or know, there still is no better way than having paper ballots, having them counted, and having scrutineers from each party overview the counting of ballots in each district and in each polling area. And we see they say the biggest concern about that is it takes so long. Well, with all of the electronic balloting that we've got all around the world and in Canada and the US, there are still times when we're told, no, you're not going to know till next week. You're not going to know till a few days. There is no safer method. No method is 100% foolproof. There is no safer method than scrutinized, scrutineered hand balloting and then preserving of those ballots. Now, somebody could say, well, there's no way people ballot harvest, millions and millions of ballots. There's no proof of that. It doesn't have to be millions and millions. Remember, the only time this makes a difference is in elections where in a handful of constituencies, the vote is going to be very close. And in those constituencies, which can make the difference between a government having a majority or not, in those constituencies, yes, a handful of votes, a handful, 10 votes, 20 votes can actually make a difference. 100 votes can make a difference. That could be the difference between a government having a majority winning an election or not. So it doesn't have to be done by the millions. It just has to be done in certain areas. And so, I mean, I still stick to this thing of, so what if we have to wait? And I'm not sure that we do anyway. A couple more hours to get the results. Nothing like paper balloting. Stay away from the electronic stuff. And what we see in the concern is there. Why would you be opposed to, for instance, having to have identification to vote? And why would you be opposed to supervised, organized counting of hand marked ballots? That's the question we should be asking. Well, a little uptick here on Iran. And a good column today by Robert McGinnis. He's a constant observer and recorder of war-like stories, and talking about the fact that even though the U.S. is much stronger, no comparison to Iran, the U.S. military might is the strongest in the world, completely more than what Iran has. But Iran has all kinds of other options that they can use. So when the U.S. would zero in on an area, let's say the Strait of Hormuz, Iran just broadens their area. They use their terrorist groups, which they wisely put into place decades ago around the world, and they just give the orders. And they say, okay, U.S., if you attack the Strait of Hormuz, you're going to see people starting to blow up in other areas. That's where they can have the edge, and it becomes very difficult, even though you have the overwhelming power. It's like the guacamole, you smack that gopher that pops up and another two pop up in other holes. And so it shows, if you are going to be intent on taking out Iran, you've got to take out their entire leadership structure, call it regime change, call it whatever you want. And you've got to take out their economic structure to bring the regime to its knees so that the people can rise up. And another area that's pointed out where President Trump continues to make mistakes, he will broadcast on his Truth Social what he's going to do. And even before the military has got their act fully together on it, one of the things that we learn from the art of war is that secrecy and surprise are your two main elements. And I'm hoping he's learning his lesson, because if you recall, he put out on his Truth Social network that he was going to start tolling, charging ships to be tolled. And then after putting that out, it was found out in terms of maritime law, even U.S. maritime law, you can't actually do that in international waters. He had to take it down. So he's got to stop doing that, because that's an unforced error that actually makes him look a little bit weak. So we're going to see if the U.S. is going to be responding with more vigor, pinpointing these particular areas. People say, well, the U.S. has put Iran in check. They've largely taken out most of their Navy, most of their Air Force, most of their ballistic missiles, their nuclear system. Yes, but that's the key. They've taken out most of it. But as long as there's one guy hiding in a cave who can keep firing those rockets at ships, it's going to be a problem. So the U.S. has them in check, but not checkmate yet. As McGinnis says, focused, controlled, discipline, you can win it. But this is not easy. The markets are reflecting it around the world. We're seeing a little bit of jitters. We're seeing the price of oil going back up now, not near where it was. So keep an eye on these. I won't go into the details. We've got all those from earlier in the week. Well, in terms of communicating messages and getting your message out there, if you've got a platform, then you've got a message. And those of you who follow women's NBA, the National Basketball Association, it's increasing in popularity all the time, largely due to with Caitlin Clark, who is a phenomenal player. But there's other really good players out there. Sophie Cunningham, if you're not aware of that name, she plays for the Indiana Fever. very well known, and she is an influencer and rock star in herself out there in the internet world. And she just, out of the blue, she just published a whole attack on the issue of should you be building data AI centers. She put that up on her post. Nothing to do with basketball, but she got 8 million views instantly, thousands and thousands of comments. And again, it just underlines the fact that these companies, and I believe these data centers, the one that Meta has announced for Alberta, we talked about that in detail. It's going to be the largest investment they've made outside of the US, huge job creators. Meta, with its AI capabilities, and actually all these companies with AI capabilities, yes, it is like the discovery of fire. People do get burned, but if it's used properly, hugely advantageous to us, of the human race, whether we're talking about innovation, whether we're talking about healthcare breakthroughs that save millions of lives, or whether we're talking about scientific breakthroughs on the environmental. And no question that AI has huge possibilities, along with dangers that have to be monitored. But I'm saying to these huge companies, if you're not out there and you're not getting influencers to talk about your message, if you're not really honing your message and getting it out about the positives, even as recently as yesterday, after I did my news item on Meta and the building of the investing billions of dollars to build a plant, an AI center in Alberta. Again, you still get people talking about things like what it's going to have an effect on water shortage. And in fact, it's been a long time now since these AI centers they've leapfrogged that problem. We've got closed loop water systems that continually use the water. We've got all kinds of technological advantages it didn't have before. I'm just telling these big AI groups, if you want to build these centers, and I want them built so that we can see human life and the human condition improve, you've got to get the message out there. It's not going to carry itself. And you've got to use the same avenues. For every Sophie Cunningham, there's a top-notch player who needs a little bit of support, or top-notch people in the influence world who can legitimately and honestly carry your message. You've got to be breaking into that, or you're going to lose. Well, people who talk about messaging, you remember Don Lemon, and of course he was a star commentator for many, many years, and then lost his position. I won't get into all of that. But now he is musing about maybe running for president. So again, an influencer, huge influence, significantly left wing, very left wing on the social issues, talking about running for the Democrats. And I would say to people like the governor of California and others, and even to AOC, beware, guys like Don Lemon. They can be real threats, and you need to have a bit of an eye towards that. Well, in her column today, Barry Weiss writes an interesting thing, talking about, of course, as we know, everything now has become a gambling issue. You can bet on anything, literally anything. You can bet on how long this podcast is going to last. You can bet on whether I'm going to be wearing a light blue jacket as I am today, or something dark. You can bet on anything and make money. And where you really make money, and this is unfortunate, but insiders, unfortunately, and these betting networks, they do try to limit insider information. But the guy who was operating the teleprompter for President Trump's speech last night made 100 grand instantly. He went on a betting channel. He had information nobody else had. He knew what was going to be in the speech, and he put bets on that, and he won 100 grand. So teleprompter guy, operator, good for you. Hunter Biden, as you know, the completely disgraced son of Joe Biden, and I won't get into all of the terrible things he was involved in the past, seems to have reformed. And, I'm a big believer in second and third chances. And he claims he's gotten off of his drug addiction. He's gotten off of some of the ugly other stuff he was involved in. It's not a word to you, Hunter, if you're talking about, and you'll get a lot of sympathy, and you should, if you're making an honest attempt to try and get things straightened out in your life. But going on a show, meeting and doing a show in a motel room with Nick Fuentes, the top Nazi sympathizer, certainly in the influencer world today, one of the strongest anti-Semitic Jew-hating people around, and you're doing a meeting with him do an interview in a motel room. Not a good look, Hunter. You might want to think about that. Well, Very interesting. Uber, of course, those of you who know that I've always been a fan of Uber. I was a supporter when they first started up and they were having to fight the so-called taxi wars, where taxis were allowed to continue to have monopolies in most major cities. Taxis had monopolies because big taxi companies would go to the politicians and they would tell those politicians, look, there's a, if you're in New York City, there's 40,000 yellow taxi drivers, and if you want their votes, you better do stuff to support us and protect our industry, not let other people get in. And that was what, it was that type of political stuff that Uber around the world had to face. And gradually, by being focused and being consistent and having a good product, they, of course, Uber is everywhere. Now it's interesting to see let's say the steering wheel is in the other hand, or the shoe is on the other foot, because Uber is lobbying in Washington, D.C., of all places, because Waymo, that's the autonomously driven taxis, and I have taken one of those. Did that in Phoenix, and it's an amazing experience being in a car for 10 or 15 minutes through busy traffic, sitting there, and it's talking to you. And it's a little unnerving, but there's no questioning the stats. Autonomous driven cars, in terms of accidents, in terms of injuries, 92% lower than human driven cars. The safety record comparison is phenomenal. As I know, mainstream media continue, they'll show you the odd story where one crashed and maybe a grandma caught on fire or something happened. Those tragedies still happen. No question about it. Waymo and autonomous cars way more safe than other cars. I'm looking forward to it, as I guess I'm going to hit seniors' old age at some point, and not having to worry about night driving, not having to worry about reflexes, being able to hop into a Waymo or my own autonomous driven car. Anyway, Uber is now lobbying that shouldn't be allowed to come into, well, they're saying Washington, D.C., but they're saying anywhere. And they're saying if you are going to have these autonomous cars, there needs to be at least a driver, an Uber driver in each of these cars. So pretty interesting. Uber making huge technological breakthroughs. Now the shoe is on the other foot, and they're trying to stop Waymo. You can read all that in Rebecca Welland's column over there at TechCrunch. Very interesting. I'm going to make a prediction. I know this is scary and it's way out ahead of the elections, but you're going to see a showdown among other people running, I believe, for the Republican ticket. Marco Rubio for sure, and JD Vance for sure. And two interesting things happened within the last 48 hours. JD Vance went on Joe Rogan and surprised a lot of people by sounding a little more progressive than people, a little more left leaning. I'm not going to get into all that. We can dissect that at a later date, but he's clearly tapping into Joe Rogan's network. Joe Rogan, by the way, is no right winger. He's not a conservative. He's not Republican. And so J.D. Vance putting out the so-called kinder, gentler message. And the same day, literally the same day, Marco Rubio put out widespread news release and warning, saying that leftist terrorists, violent leftist people should not be allowed even into the country right from the start. If they've been seen to inciting leftist violent movements, they should not be allowed in. So both men putting out different messages, and watch for that showdown with Vance and Rubio. There will be others in the race, I'm sure, and we will see. You'll recall, regular listeners and watchers will recall, that I've said over the last couple of years, as AI continues to be unbelievable in terms of it can generate video that you can't even tell if it's real or not. This could be, it's not, but this could be a video generated transmission you're seeing right now. It's that good. Now I'm telling you, it's not. This is me, I promise. But it's that good. And people are bemoaning that. But I've said, and even in the making of movies, I've said, I think what we're going to see in terms of a counterbalance or a pushback is the need for authenticity. If you can show, the need to prove that you are authentic is just showing up everywhere. That's why I think there'll be an increase in terms of demand for live theater and other things that are happening live. And so we've seen Casey Lewis is talking about in her column about niche versus brand among Gen Z. Niche elements niche purchases as opposed to mass brands, and niche products, whatever they might be, or services, definitely, I won't say taking the lead, but definitely on the increase as Gen Z increasingly is looking to the influencer who's telling you the product or the service is good. So again, it's coming down to authenticity, coming down to very narrow things. And if you can be authentic, you can show you're an influencer with authenticity, people are going to tend to buy that little item that might just casually be sitting on your desk or pinned to your lapel or whatever it might be. So that increase there is forcing brands to really think how they reach out to people. Well, there's an article in Premier, it's called Premier Christian News today, and it's talking about Army chaplains reporting a significant increase among soldiers who are coming to them and wanting to hear more about Christianity and wanting actually to hear about Jesus Christ and the importance of Jesus Christ. Now, a couple different reasons for this. First of all, and increasingly over this last generation, the number of people taking their kids to church has dropped significantly over the last 15 to 20 years, even longer than that, been a significant drop. So you've got these mainly young men, sometimes young women, they've literally, they haven't been to church, they've never heard, but they hear testimonies, they hear stuff in the news about the Christian message, and they're asking their Army chaplains to explain to them even what things like salvation are. The other aspect to that, which driving that, in the Second World War, probably First World War, I think you'd probably say any war, but largely reported in the Second World War, the thousands and thousands of American, mainly young men and Canadian young men, heading off to war. And we all know that famous saying that there are no atheists in foxholes. There are no atheists in foxholes. Foxholes being those in those holes in the ground that were created. Airplanes would go over a battlefield before, and they would carpet bomb it to create lots of holes so that the soldiers who were charging and running into the machine gun fire could dive into these foxholes. And once they're in those foxholes, they are crying out to God. They're saying, God, get me through this war, get me through alive, help me get back to my family, and I'll be your guy. And it's clearly documented by the thousands, if not the millions, of men making that cry for God's help in those times. And similar thing happening now, except these young men, today's young men, many of them haven't heard that message, and they know that the chance of them going into war is very real because they do wind up going there, and they're actually crying out. And the way they're crying out is they're going to these chaplains. So very interesting to see. It's going to have I think, a sociological effect, but it'll also bring people to reality, which is kind of cool. That since there is a living God, if you do cry out to Him, He will actually hear you. So something to think about, folks, through the day. Thanks for tuning in. Tune in tomorrow. I'll give you a sneak peek at the week ahead. Thanks, and bye now.